streaming live. This is Tracking the Tropics.
The tropics remain quiet for now, but the end of hurricane season is still just under 2 months away. A good reminder to not let your guard down is 1 year ago tomorrow is the anniversary of Hurricane Michael's landfall in the panhandle of Florida. That was the Category 5 storm that made landfall near Panama City. Hey there, everyone. Storm Team 8 meteorologist Amanda Hawley here with our Wednesday, October 9th edition of Tracking the Tropics. We're live to many stations across the United States this afternoon, talking about what's out there right now, as well as the anniversary of Hurricane Michael. Joining me today is Storm Team 8's meteorologist Julie Phillips. Thanks as always, Julie, for joining us. And our featured meteorologist today is WMBB's Chief Meteorologist Ross Whitley from Panama City itself. We couldn't think of a better featured meteorologist to join us today to kind of recap what happened 1 year ago and watch and kind of go over the events that have unfolded from in just a short amount of time last year. I do want to get to all of that, and we certainly will get to all of the events with Hurricane Michael. But first, of course, let's talk about what's out there in the tropics right now, which I'm going to send it over to Julie. Not a whole lot going on. A couple areas of potential development right now, Julie.
Yeah, we do actually have 3 disturbances out there. These all have potential for tropical or subtropical development. The good news is, though, for the coast of the United States, none of these are threatening. So just a few areas that we are currently watching. We've got a couple of regions that are closer to the coast right now. You can see those polygons in yellow. Those 2 disturbances, a small chance of development, and then another disturbance out in the Atlantic. Again, all of these will be kept off the coast because we've been seeing round after round of some cold fronts rolling through, and that is going to keep any of these systems really from having any impact on the U.S. at all. We may not even see any development. There's low to moderate chances of development with these systems, and some may not even be tropical if they were to actually strengthen and develop a little bit further. So not a whole lot going on right now. You notice still some deeper moisture, though, in the Caribbean, and this time of year is actually when we can see things popping up in the Gulf, so we keep our eye on that.
That's exactly right. And the good news is all of these areas of potential development, they're off the coast. I think what we will see is some higher seas along the Carolina coastline and up towards the northeast, but otherwise not a whole lot going on for us. In fact, we're actually going to dry out this weekend, Julie, and even for Ross up there in Panama City, you guys are going to be feeling a nice weekend as well.
Yeah, thankfully, we would like the cooler air to come into the panhandle. It's just been sweltering across the southeast.
And much different compared to what you guys were experiencing a year ago.
Oh, yeah. This time last year, we were in full tropical coverage and full wouldn't say panic mode, but full on like, hey, well, you need to be prepared, you need to be listening, you need to be paying attention, and if you can, you need to get the heck out of the way.
And at this point, this was a storm, Hurricane Michael. Now we've transitioned to, we're just going to kind of go over what happened. And I mean, you see the timeline there, October 7th through the 11th. This was not a very prolonged event, and not a whole lot of people had a lot of time to prepare for this, which is, of course, why we always say stay prepared throughout all of hurricane season, because events like this can happen very quickly. So October 7th was when we initially saw that tropical depression form, and it started racing off to generally the north into the Gulf of Mexico, and started a period of rapid intensification that never really stopped.
Yeah, as Julie pointed out, this time of year is when we look at the Northern Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico for tropical development. Sometimes cold fronts can kind of spur that on. Sometimes you have some other factors. The Caribbean just a tad bit more active this time of year. And typically, Florida is put in the crosshairs when we have a system coming out of the Caribbean. Also, thanks to cold fronts, push things back off to the east. And this was one of those things. It started off in a rather high shear environment, and we saw the storm pop up, thought, it's got a lot of shear. There's some dry air it's going to be battling. This thing probably going to be a weak storm as it enters the Gulf of Mexico. And beknownst to us, that didn't happen. It developed within 12 hours into a hurricane, and then within 12 hours from that, it was into a Category 2, 8 hours from that, Category 3, 8 hours from that, Category 4, and then right on the cusp of a Category 5 and eventually deemed a Category 5 as it made landfall right around Tyndall Air Force Base, which is about 5 miles to the south and east of Panama City, and about 7 miles to the south and east of the station where we were doing coverage. while the storm went across. So yeah, to echo what you just said, this is a case of 3 days out. It was a tropical storm, and of all of the Category Fives to hit the U.S. 3 days out, all four of them were tropical storms. So you're given 48 hours basically. Where you're going to be impacted by a storm and a serious one like this. And so you need to be prepared within 48 hours. That means extra water. That means your house. That means have your evacuation plan in order, know what you're going to be doing within 48 hours. And Hurricane Michael proved that.
That's right. And Julie was here as well, kind of watching this storm in Tampa Bay as it, made its way kind of past the Bay Area, heading for the Panhandle. Julie, can you recap of what you guys were thinking here? I was at a different station at the time a year ago, but you were here in Tampa Bay, Julie.
Absolutely. We were keeping a close eye on this system. And thankfully, we avoided any impacts here in the Tampa Bay area from it. But it still was unnerving having a system, watching it just out of the realm of having an impact really on their Bay Area as it moved north through the Gulf. And we were just watching that rapid intensification. And as it just headed toward the coast, of course, the concerns are people prepared? This storm is rapidly intensifying. It's not like some of the Irmas or storms we've watched that have been Category 5s for days before making landfall. Like you just mentioned, this was a tropical storm 3 days prior and then rapidly intensified as it approached the coastline. And, the Panhandle, the northern Gulf Coast, they have seen storms, but for a Category 5 landfall, I mean, this is, a totally, that's just a ball game when you've got a storm of that strength just kind of barreling toward the coast with nothing slowing it down. So we remember watching, and here in the Tampa Bay area, a little sigh of relief, that this was going to stay well off the coast of us. There was nothing that was going to turn the storm east like a Charlie or something like that. But it was still unnerving. And of course, then you're just worried about if you have any friends, family in that region of the country.
And of course, our friends over in our sister station, WMBB, you guys were gearing up for the damage that was to come. I'm going to show the pictures that Ross sent us just a couple days ago from Michael just a year ago. So Ross, you were telling me earlier, some of these pictures were taken the day of, some of them were taken the day after. Regardless, some major damage here. Why don't you walk us through some of the pictures?
Yeah, all the ones with cloud cover in them are the day of. So that was when I was able to get outside. Obviously, we had been knocked off the air, and we have to thank our friends at WFLA down in Tampa because they took over the coverage when we dropped off. And so that was immensely helpful, at least to peace of mind of us that somebody was doing the coverage. But looking at these pictures, day after, year after, we've come a long way. Cleanup, that's number one. But in the moment and at the time and where we are still, these pictures are just impressive. I mean, think about what 110 mile per hour winds can do. And it's hard to imagine the kind of damage that comes along with that. And then you jump up to 160 mile per hour winds, and then you see complete catastrophic damage that we talk about. Hard to imagine that your home, a well-built structure, is going to fail. It's hard to imagine that when you see a high-tension power line like what we just shown, that's going to be on the ground, not just on the ground partially, but for miles. So this picture here, that's the old high school. This is right outside the station. What you're seeing on the ground there, that's actually pull off of the church. Look at these power poles. You'll notice that there's holes around the base of the power poles because they were vibrating and shaking so hard that the concrete actually broke loose around the power poles. So even if they didn't snap, the power poles had failed. And then a lot of attention to jinx here, obviously just because of the impressive power that wind can do. But you don't think about, even if you do have a well-built home, you can't do anything about a tree falling on your home. And most of what happens is usually something punctures the garage door or gets into part of your house and creates that weakness, and then wind finds that weakness and starts to tear it apart. And that's basically what we saw with the majority of the damage around Hurricane Michael. Was mostly wind damage. Now, obviously, Mexico Beach had storm surge. You want to talk about sad, emotional devastation, go to Mexico Beach even still to this day, and you'll just see blocks of foundations. That's all that's left. It's not There's no homes, there's no structures. It's just foundations. It's wiped clean. Water came in, lifted the house off, and then basically broke it apart. And then you go all the way up to I-10, even up through Mariana and to Southwest Georgia, and you'll still see tree damage like what I'm showing you here. Even a year later, we're talking a year later, and that church that was just shown there, they just put a roof on this week, so it's been sitting there like that without a roof for almost a year. Jinx Middle School, they've got their gym back. The tree damage is cleaned up, but the trees, they won't be replaced. Take decades to recover the forest around here, and it's devastating because most people grew up here with basically a fairy tale landscape. It's just there were so many trees, and it was so densely packed that you would drive into areas dark when you drove in because the trees blocked out the shade or blocked out the sun when you were driving through, and now it's just an open landscape with no trees, and you have clear sight lines, and so it's a complete change. And as Julie mentioned, people experience category 1s, category 2s, and occasionally category 3s. Most people, and most of the time, people don't experience category 4s. Look back in the history, category 4s are relatively rare at U.S. landfalls anyways, and category 5s, there's been 4 of them. So through the tracking of our history, there's been 4 category 5s that have made landfall in the U.S. And hopefully, as we're going forward, that even though we have seen an uptick in the number of category 5s in over the ocean the last several years, hopefully that still deters them from making landfall in the U.S. Because if not, this is a scene that we're going to see repeated from these types of storms. And I can't stress enough how devastating it truly is. You don't want to be here during the storm. You don't want to be here after the storm. And our community is going to recover. We're going to be better. But it's definitely something that's going to leave a lasting impact.
So you're talking about, a whole year later, and just 1 week ago, a school was replaced, and I'm sure that, or the roof was replaced on the school. I'm sure that story is familiar and sounds the same for a lot of different folks up there in the Panhandle, that they're still trying to get roofs or still trying to get, whole new buildings. Is that just because there are so many people in need of help at this point?
Yeah. So when you look at the tree damage and tree loss from Bay County to Jackson County, so that's covering up 4 county areas, 90 million trees were lost. And a lot of this area is a timber industry. So that's a lot of farms and a lot of communities that lost basically all of their sources of income. So now they're relying on insurances to come back and pay them for what they would have made in the future from their timber crop or what they would have profited off of. And obviously one thing that is great is to have insurance. The other thing is to have insurance actually pay you after a storm. So mainly the problem has been is that people are battling with insurance companies to say, hey, yeah, wind did this damage, not water, or some other reason, structure failure during this storm. And you'd be surprised how many times I've heard that. In Mexico Beach, for instance, I had people contacting me saying, hey, the insurance company says that my house was destroyed by storm surge and wind played no role in it. And I'm like, that's mind-boggling to me that somebody could tell you that wind had no role in the destruction of your home when a Category 5 hurricane went over the top of your structure.
Yeah.
And then the other issue is, as you said, there's just a ton of people that need help in this area, and there's a shortage of help. So
there's only so many contractors out there that are qualified to replace roofs and buildings.
And in Florida, they're pretty strong about code enforcement these days, and rightfully so, looking at these pictures.
Right.
So you have to have that strong certification in Florida. You have to be able to build the code, and so those number of contractors, they're limited, and there's a lot of construction that needs to be done. So it's taken a long time because of all of those factors. I think the most mind-boggling number that I have heard from this is the damage collected and debris collected from this storm was more than all of the debris collected from Hurricane Irma in the entire state of Florida in just 4 counties. Wow. So we had more damage in 4 counties than the entire state of Florida had from Hurricane Irma.
That's very impressive. And there's a lot of those little facts that, we don't hear that you guys, are picking up on, over the course of the past year. And it's just people, go on with their lives, and you guys are still dealing with some of this damage. It's very unfortunate. Let's talk a little bit about the reclassification here from Category 4 to Category 5. I feel like a lot of people think that, the surveyors went out there and looked at some damage and said, oh, no, we're going to upgrade this to Category 4 or Category 5, excuse me. The process is a little bit different than that, right, Ross? And Julie, you can chime in here too. They actually went back and looked at numbers from the drop zones that the hurricane hunters were doing. They were looking at radar data from the radars that are around the area. And actually, this was an analysis of data. That's where we got the reclassification from.
Yeah, I actually got to talk to the director of the National Hurricane Center a couple months after Hurricane Michael, and we had a nice discussion about this, about the reclassification. And I was talking to him just kind of frankly. I was like, "Hey, do you think that this will be reclassified when we do reanalysis as a Category 5 hurricane?" And he said no. That's what he told me. And I was surprised. I was like, okay. And then we got into the explanation behind that. And he told me, he said, well, the only places that just looking off of the damage. So just as what you were saying, people were thinking, oh, well, they just surveyed the damage. Just looking at the damage, Tyndall Air Force Base and parts of Mexico Beach, you could say, okay, yeah, this was Category 5 type of wind. But when you go back and you look at the damage and you do the reanalysis on what actually was happening based off velocities and what we had off of the drop zones, then there's a much stronger case for a Category 5 at landfall, as opposed to just looking at the damage alone, because the damage alone would say, no, this is pretty borderline. This is Category 4. This is what we expect to see with Category 4. But when you add in all of the other data and you have, the drops on off and your pressure going down to 919, and that was measured ground truth at Tyndall Air Force Base, and you say, okay, well, if you extrapolate that out with our drops ons, with our flight wind data, then we have at least 160 mile per hour winds at the surface, if not 164, 165, which you could make the argument for that as well. And that's the ultimate reason behind why they decided, hey, yeah, this is going to be a Category 5. And we're going to put in there that strong wording that this was a Category 5 over Tyndall Air Force Base and over Mexico Beach. But as it moved inland, not just 4 miles up the road, that we would have classified that as a Category 4, not a Category 5. So they wanted to be very, very strict about where they were saying this was a Category 5 and where they were saying this was a Category 4. But in the end, that just means that it's historic, that right. It's really, semantics between 157 and 160 mile per hour. You get the same type of damage.
It's very hard to distinguish on the ground anyway, right? It was months of rolling through all of that data.
Absolutely.
So very interesting kind of just a fact there, that they did end up reclassifying that, because a lot of people probably think back and remember Category 4, strong Category 4 at that, like you say, 156, 157 mile per hour winds. But then we're actually now talking about Category 5 storm. Now we're talking about record books of damage.
I think it was very interesting hearing that, because even as a meteorologist, we don't always, with us being a little bit farther removed from Michael, know all of the reasoning behind of why this was upgraded. It definitely makes sense at the time. They're getting all the data in, and then you have to go back and look at everything, and then give their best analysis of what actual category it was. So I thought that was a very interesting comments you made there.
Yeah. All right, guys, go for
ahead.
It, Ross.
No, I was just say. Yeah, I think that's always intriguing to me and meteorologists in general, and we're probably much more nerdy about it than people just generally viewing the subject, because we don't get a whole lot of ground verification with systems over the Atlantic. We say something's a Category 5, and we're basing it off satellite data and drop zones. But in this case, you're actually able to get the information from the ground truth, which went into that reclassification, which unfortunately and fortunately, you had an ASOS station that went right through the eye wall and the center of the hurricane to get that pressure reading, so they could verify this as a Category 5.
Amazing that it even lasted that long to get that low of a reading, and then, continued that from there on out. Because a lot of the stations, the reporting stations from around there, they went out well before the center of the storm even made its way close to land.
Yeah, that's one of the only stations that the ASOS was still working. They recorded a wind gust up to 130 miles per hour, but then from what I've been told from the few people that were at the Air Force Base, some kind of debris came and knocked off the anemometer, so that was gone. So, but they still had your barometer there to measure the pressure. So that was about the only thing from most of the ASOS stations around the area that still were working is the pressure readings. Ourselves, we had a big station on the roof, and because another roof landed on our roof, our anemometer was gone. But we measured a minimum pressure at the station of 937. So at the station, we dropped all the way down to 937. And I would say wind speeds were probably, this is a guesstimation, but I would say wind speeds were probably gusting to about 130, 140 at the station. We lost the anemometer with a 100-mile-per-hour wind gust. So that was the last reading we got. And then it was gone.
And you guys rode out the storm the entire time in the station, right? Obviously, you were knocked off air, and we're going to show a package here in just a minute on kind of how WFLA helped you guys out a little bit, because you guys were in the middle of it. I mean, literally the thick of it, and you guys were knocked off the air. Yeah.
So about 15 minutes into the eye wall being over the top of us, we had that gust, and the roof next to us, the church building next to us, their roof ripped off. And their metal roof landed on our roof. We didn't know what it was. We just could feel the building shaking. So every time there was a gust, it would pick up that metal roof and slam it back down on top of our roof, and our whole building would shake. And we're in the studio, and for a good 15 minutes, we're on air while this is going. And we're like, thinking, well, are we going to lose our roof? Or are we going to have something come in the roof? Or, are we okay? Are we safe? Are we... those were all going through our heads while we were on air. And then ultimately, something cut the gas line to our generator, and that was it. We were in the dark. At that point in time, we took shelter in the middle of the news station where we thought would be the safest, at least putting the most amount of walls between us and the outside. And there were about 30 of us at the station, all huddled in there. And we had, water coming in from the ceiling, raining down. We had our drop ceiling falling all over us. Our back door was pinned. We had water coming through the back door. And, basically it was like, hey, are we going to get out of this station after today? Like, are we going to be able to walk out the front door? So it was a good hour and 30 minutes of, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if we're going to make it through today. But thankfully, we didn't have, any problems at the station, and we all survived. We got through it, and we ended up, we were stuck there that night in a flooded news station. But we made it through, and we're still here. And, the building is reopening tomorrow. So we're all excited about that.
Very excited, I bet. So during that time, WMBB and WFLA are sister stations here, and WFLA kind of, everybody gathered around to see what we could do to kind of help the folks from Panama City and their viewing area to keep getting the information of what was happening outside. So I want to play a package that we put together last week about kind of what WFLA did and what WMBB was going through as well. So let's listen in.
WMBB quite a bit. We had their signal up in the newsroom, and we were just watching as they were in wall-to-wall coverage, and we knew that at any moment it could just end.
Just lost power.
I mean, we didn't know what to expect.
Our lights are out in the studio.
Hurricane Michael was making landfall, and then all of a sudden it happened.
And I get the call that WMBB went down and that I needed to get to Tampa and that we were going to be working 12-hour, maybe more shifts. So you kind of just like buckle up and you prepare for the worst.
I remember our news director telling us that the plan was that we were just going to go basically wall to wall for WMBB because they were in wall to wall coverage, and then all of a sudden they couldn't be. I remember seeing the cell phone video of them in the basement because portions of their studio at WMBB in Panama City, they had flooded out. And when the first images started to come in, I think our hearts sank.
I remember looking at you and our eyes were both watery because they were bad. We knew they were going to be bad, but they were horrible.
We realized that digital was the way to go.
Yeah, we knew if there was any way they were going to watch us, it was going to be their cell phone, and likely Facebook Live was what we were doing. We were streaming to Facebook Live and their website.
Yeah.
We just knew that was the only way we could reach them. All of the elements that they were dealing with this hurricane, the winds, the storm surge, the water.
And I remember we were in 12-hour rotations, and we had Avery Cotton, Evan Donovan, we had Victoria Price.
I think John Rogers.
Rogers. Yep.
We were shocked to see the devastation. And then you can kind of answer to then how we got the viewers involved.
Right. We were able to take the Hurricane Hunter aerial imagery and just start looking up particular neighborhoods. And then on Facebook Live, people started punching in their own addresses. And we said, okay, somebody needs our help. Somebody wants us to look up their particular address. These are people who had fled the Panhandle. So all of a sudden, we're looking up particular houses, and we're showing to people, and we are revealing to people what had actually happened to this street or this neighborhood or this community or this exact house live on stream. And it was a surreal experience being able to reveal to some people who were joining us on Facebook Live what had actually happened to their home.
We spent hours upon hours, days upon days, just being engrossed in what was happening there. And then, then they got back up on the air. And I remember when they got back up in the air and did their first newscast, and they were in chairs like this in their parking lot, and they were sharing a microphone. And when they all had tears in their eyes because they were sharing their experiences of how horrible of a night it had been and what everyone had been through. And then again, we were so emotional just seeing them for the first time. It was happy, it was tears, because they had been through a lot. And I just felt very rewarded, and I felt very connected to them, and also kind of a camaraderie because we've been there, we've lived through hurricanes, and I know they would do the same for us. So it was very rewarding.
It was a sucker punch to see what had happened to the Panhandle. It's an area that I know well. I used to live nearby on the Gulf Coast. It's a year later, but we don't forget. We remember what happened to the Panhandle during Hurricane Michael.
All right, everybody. That was just kind of a recap of how WFLA kind of helped out WMBB as they went off the air during this catastrophe of a situation as Category 5 Hurricane Michael ravaged the Panhandle, making landfall just south of Panama City there, near Ross Whitley and kind of over his station there. But otherwise, we are going to kind of wrap up this edition of Tracking the Tropics. If we go back to our graphics here, not a whole lot going on right now, relatively quiet in the tropics, which is good news. We like to see that. And, we typically are seeing a downward trend of activity in the tropics this time of year, but hurricane season not over until the very end of November. And of course, Hurricane Michael was a good reminder of that, which was, again, the 1-year anniversary of landfall is tomorrow. So we're still not out of the woods with hurricane season just yet. But all is quiet at this time. There's a couple areas of potential development, but even if those develop, we should be good to go. They should stay out in the Atlantic. Of course, we're going to continue to track it here on Tracking the Tropics, regardless if there's activity out there or not. We are here every single Wednesday for you, Tracking the Tropics, Wednesdays at 1:30 Eastern, 12:30 Central, right here on this app or this website. And again, regardless if there's activity out there or not, we're going to be tracking it. This edition was kind of a little on the special side. Of course, we're doing a lot of digital stuff this week for the anniversary of Hurricane Michael and our friends there in Panama City. I want to thank Chief Meteorologist Ross Whitley for joining us today and kind of providing all of that insight just to kind of hear what you went through and just since the whole year has gone by to see how things have recovered. Thank you so much, Ross, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, as always, thanks to Julie for joining us from here in Tampa. Storm Team 8 meteorologist Julie Phillips there. We are going to get going. And again, we'll have more on Hurricane Michael, especially on our digital platform, as well as on our newscasts coming up tonight and tomorrow as well. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Otherwise, we hope you join us for next week's edition of Tracking the Tropics. For now, we'll see you later.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.